Deep in the heart of Africa, where tall green trees stretched toward the sky and thick forests surrounded the land, there stood a small village called Nambla. The people of Nambla lived simple lives. They farmed the rich soil, gathered fresh water from the river, and shared stories around warm evening fires. Their traditions had been passed down for countless generations, and everyone respected the words of their elders. But beyond the last row of mud houses, where the forest grew dark and quiet, stood a lonely hut that no one dared to visit. The hut was older than anyone could remember. Its roof was covered with moss, its walls were cracked with age, and long vines wrapped around it like giant snakes. Even during the brightest afternoons, a strange shadow seemed to rest over the little building. Children were told never to look toward it. Adults never spoke of it for long. And when the wind blew through the trees at night, many believed they could hear whispers coming from its broken windows. No one knew exactly when the fear had begun. Some said entire families had disappeared after walking too close to the hut. Others claimed strange lights floated above its roof during the darkest nights. There were stories of hunters hearing voices calling their names from deep inside the forest, only to return frightened and refusing to speak of what they had seen. Every family in Nambla knew at least one frightening story. Whether those stories were true or not no longer mattered. Fear had become stronger than the truth. The village elders often gathered the children beneath the giant baobab tree to remind them of the danger. The spirits inside that hut do not forgive, the oldest elder would say with a serious face. They watch anyone who comes too close. The younger children would cover their ears and cling to their mothers. Some even cried. From that day forward, they avoided the path leading toward the forest. Even the bravest hunters refused to travel near the hut after sunset. They chose longer routes through rough hills rather than past the old building. If someone accidentally found themselves near the forest as darkness fell, they hurried home without looking back. No one wanted to challenge the curse. Only one child wondered if the stories were really true. That child was Kito. Kito was an orphan who had lost both parents when he was very young. He had been raised by his gentle grandmother, who taught him to be kind, honest, and respectful. Although they had very little, she always reminded him that a curious mind was richer than a full pocket. Unlike the other children, Kito did not enjoy repeating frightening stories. He wanted answers. Whenever someone spoke about the ancient hut, he listened carefully instead of running away. "Has anyone actually seen these spirits?" he once asked. The other children stared at him in shock. One boy laughed loudly. "You ask too many questions." Another shook his head. "Only a fool wants to know what lives inside that place." Soon, everyone began teasing Kito whenever he mentioned the hut. Some called him foolish. Others whispered that he would disappear one day if he kept asking questions. Even though their words hurt, Kito stayed quiet. He often sat alone beside the river, watching the forest in the distance. Every evening, the old hut stood silently between the trees, as if it were waiting for someone brave enough to uncover its secret. Sometimes Kito wondered if the hut was lonely too. Perhaps people feared it without ever trying to understand it. The thought stayed in his heart. A few days later, the village celebrated the festival of harvest. Drums echoed through the air, dancers filled the open square, and families gathered to share food, laughter, and songs that honored their ancestors. As night fell, everyone gathered around a great fire. An elderly storyteller named Baba Jengo slowly stood before the crowd. His face was lined with age, and his deep voice carried across the silent village. "I have lived longer than most of you," he began. "I have heard every story about the ancient hut." The children leaned closer. The adults lowered their eyes. Baba Jengo looked toward the dark forest before continuing. "Not one person has entered that hut for more than 100 years." A heavy silence settled over the crowd. Even the drums seemed to stop. "No one knows what truly waits inside anymore," the old man said softly. "Only fear remains." His words echoed inside Kito's mind long after the festival ended. That night, while the entire village slept peacefully beneath the stars, Kito stood outside his small home and looked toward the silent forest. The ancient hut could barely be seen beneath the moonlight. His heart beat faster. For the first time, he made a decision that would change not only his own life but the future of the entire village. If no one had entered the hut for 100 years, then someone had to discover the truth. And Kito quietly promised himself that he would be the one to do it. The morning after the harvest festival, Kito could not stop thinking about Baba Jengo's words. Asterisk, not one person has entered that hut for more than 100 years. Asterisk. The sentence echoed in his mind as he helped his grandmother fetch water from the river. While other children laughed and played nearby, Quito kept looking toward the dark forest at the edge of the village. He did not feel afraid. He felt curious. If no one has gone inside for 100 years, he whispered to himself, then how does anyone know what is really there? That question stayed with him all day. Instead of ignoring it, Quito decided to search for answers. His first stop was the village marketplace. People were busy selling baskets, fruit, carved wooden tools, and colorful cloth. The air was filled with laughter and the smell of roasted maize. Quito approached an old hunter who was sharpening his spear beneath a large tree. "Grandfather," Quito asked politely, "what is inside the ancient hut?" The hunter suddenly stopped moving. His cheerful face became serious. "I have never gone near it," he answered quietly. "But my father told me terrible creatures live there. They have glowing eyes that watch from the darkness. Anyone who enters never comes back." Quito thanked him, but something did not feel right. The hunter had admitted he had never seen the creatures himself. He was only repeating someone else's story. Later that afternoon, Quito met a woman collecting herbs outside her home. She lowered her voice before speaking. "The hut hides great treasure," she whispered. "Long ago, greedy men tried to steal it. The spirits of our ancestors became angry and have guarded it ever since." "Did you ever see the treasure?" Quito asked. The woman quickly shook her head. "No. Did anyone you know see it?" She looked away. "I only know what my grandmother told me." Again, the answer came from another old story. As the day passed, Quito spoke with more villagers. One fisherman believed a giant monster slept beneath the hut. A farmer insisted the forest itself was alive and swallowed strangers. Another elder claimed invisible spirits wandered around the building every full moon. Every story sounded frightening, but none of them matched. Each person believed something different. As Quito walked home before sunset, he frowned thoughtfully. How can they all be true, he wondered, if every story is different? For the first time, he realized something important. People were protecting the legend, but no one was protecting the truth. That evening, Quito sat beside his grandmother outside their small home. She quietly mended an old fishing net while the evening breeze carried the scent of wild flowers through the village. She noticed the worried look on his face. "You've been thinking about that hut all day," she said gently. Quito nodded. "Everyone tells a different story." His grandmother smiled softly. "Fear changes stories, my child. Every generation adds something new." Before Quito could ask another question, an old woman slowly approached their home. Everyone in the village called her Mama Zuri. She was one of the oldest people in Nambla and rarely spoke unless she believed her words truly mattered. She looked carefully around to make sure no one else was listening. Then she leaned closer to Quito. "Not every story you hear is true." Her quiet voice surprised him. "You know something." Quito asked. Mama Zari gave a slow nod. "When I was a little girl, my grandfather used to say the hut was once a place where sick people came to be healed." Quito's eyes widened. "Healed?" She nodded again. "But after many years, people stopped speaking about that part of the story. Fear is easier to remember than kindness." Before Quito could ask more questions, the old woman simply smiled and walked away into the fading sunlight. Her words stayed in his heart. That night, strange things happened. As darkness covered the village, several people pointed toward the forest. Small lights floated between the trees like tiny stars dancing in the darkness. Children screamed and ran inside their homes. "The spirits are awake," someone shouted. Doors slammed shut. Windows closed. The village became silent. Quito watched from outside his home. The lights moved slowly before disappearing behind the ancient hut. His heart pounded. The next morning, hunters returned from the forest much earlier than usual. They spoke nervously about hearing strange sounds echoing through the trees. Some said they heard whispers. Others described soft singing carried by the wind. One hunter even claimed someone was calling his name. By afternoon, another strange event spread through the village. A group of goats refused to walk along the forest path. They pulled against their ropes and cried loudly until their owner led them another way. Soon everyone believed it was another warning from the spirits. But Quito wondered something different. What if the animals are afraid of something real? He thought. Or, what if they're simply avoiding a place they've never trusted? Questions filled his mind faster than answers. A few days later, while helping clean the old village library, Quito noticed a broken wooden shelf leaning against the wall. The library was rarely visited. Dust covered almost every book, and many old scrolls had not been touched for years. As he moved the heavy shelf, something fell onto the floor. It was an old rolled-up piece of cloth tied with faded string. Carefully, Quito untied it. Inside was a hand-drawn map. The paper was worn with age, and much of the writing had faded, but one drawing immediately caught his attention. It showed the ancient hut. Unlike the frightening stories, the map did not mark the hut with warning signs. Instead, beside the drawing were faded words that Quito could barely read. Asterisk, House of Healing. Asterisk. He stared at the words in complete silence. His hands began to tremble. Below the drawing was another sentence. Asterisk, those seeking hope shall find wisdom here. Asterisk. There was no mention of monsters. No curse. No evil spirits. Only healing. Only hope. Quito slowly folded the map and looked toward the forest through the library window. At that moment, everything began to change inside him. What if the village has been afraid of the wrong thing all these years? He whispered. The stories. The warnings. The fear. Perhaps they had buried the truth instead of protecting it. Quito knew the answers would never come from rumors. There was only one place left to search. The ancient hut itself. Even if everyone warned him to stay away. Even if they called him foolish. He had already made his choice. He would uncover the truth that an entire village had been too afraid to face. And before the next sunrise, Quito quietly began preparing for the journey that no one had dared to make for 100 years. Long before the first rays of sunlight reached the rooftops of Nambla, Quito quietly opened the wooden door of his small home. The village was still asleep. Only the soft singing of crickets and the distant call of an owl filled the cool morning air. He looked back one last time. His grandmother slept peacefully beneath a woven blanket. Quito wished he could tell her where he was going, but he knew she would only worry. He gently placed a small note beside her bed. Asterisk, I promise I will come back. Asterisk. Those were the only words he wrote. Taking a deep breath, Quito picked up a small bag filled with dried fruit, a water gourd, a walking stick, and the old map he had discovered in the library. His heart pounded inside his chest. Every step toward the forest felt heavier than the last. The path leading away from the village was empty. Usually, people greeted one another at sunrise, but today there was only silence. As Quito crossed the last field, he looked back once more. The warm glow of the village seemed safe and welcoming. Ahead of him waited only darkness. Still, he kept walking. Soon the tall trees surrounded him, blocking out much of the morning light. The forest felt different from anywhere else. The air was cooler. The shadows were deeper. The wind whispered through the branches in a way that almost sounded like voices. Every snap of a twig made Quito stop and listen. Leaves rustled high above him. Something moved between the trees. His hands tightened around his walking stick. He reminded himself to stay calm. Fear is not always the truth, he whispered. The words gave him just enough courage to continue. As he walked deeper into the forest, the sounds became stranger. Birds suddenly stopped singing. Then, without warning, a long echo drifted through the trees. It sounded almost like someone calling from very far away. Quito. He froze. His heart raced. He slowly turned in every direction. No one was there. Only endless trees. Only silence. After several moments, he realized it had only been the wind flowing through hollow branches. Or at least, that was what he hoped. The narrow path soon disappeared beneath thick roots and fallen leaves. Quito had to climb over large rocks and squeeze between giant tree trunks. More than once he slipped on wet ground and nearly fell into deep holes hidden beneath the grass. The forest seemed determined to turn him back. But every obstacle only reminded him that no one had traveled this way for generations. Hours passed. Then something unexpected caught his eye. Hidden beneath climbing vines stood a circle of old stone shrines. They were small, weathered, and almost completely forgotten. Their carvings had faded with time, but they still showed people kneeling with bowls of flowers and herbs instead of weapons. Quito carefully brushed away some of the vines. This doesn't look like a place built for fear, he whispered. It looks like a place where people once prayed. He wondered who had abandoned it, and why. Leaving the shrines behind, Quito continued deeper into the forest. Soon he noticed strange markings carved into several enormous trees. The symbols were unlike anything he had seen before. Some looked like leaves. Others resembled rivers or the sun. None looked frightening. Instead, they seemed carefully carved, almost as if they were guiding travelers rather than warning them away. Quito unfolded the old map. To his surprise, several of the symbols matched the faded drawings on the cloth. Someone had created these markings long ago. Someone who wanted people to find the hut, not avoid it. The discovery filled him with both excitement and confusion. Who had changed the story? Why had everyone forgotten? Before he could think any further, a loud growl echoed nearby. Quito quickly looked toward the bushes. A large wild boar slowly stepped onto the path. Behind it stood two smaller ones. His breathing stopped. He had heard enough stories to know how dangerous wild boars could be. He remained perfectly still. The animals watched him quietly. For several long seconds, neither side moved. Then, to Quito's surprise, the mother boar simply lowered her head and led her young ones across the path before disappearing into the trees. They never charged. They never attacked. Moments later, several monkeys appeared above him. Instead of throwing branches or making loud warning calls, they simply watched him with curious eyes before swinging away through the forest canopy. Even a graceful antelope crossed his path without showing fear. Quito felt something changing inside him. The animals aren't guarding this place, he thought. They're simply living here. The stories were becoming harder to believe. Not long afterward, Quito noticed something else. Fresh footprints. They were not animal tracks. They looked almost human. Nearby, broken branches lay scattered across the ground. Someone, or something, had passed through recently. His heartbeat quickened again. Could another person be searching for the hut? Or had someone been secretly visiting it all along? The mystery grew deeper with every step. Dark clouds suddenly rolled across the sky. The forest became strangely quiet. A cold wind swept through the trees. Then the rain came. It fell without warning. Within seconds, the narrow trails became slippery streams of mud. Thunder shook the earth. Lightning flashed across the sky, lighting the forest for only a heartbeat before darkness returned. Quito pulled his small cloth over his head, but it offered little protection. His clothes became soaked. His feet slipped again and again. He stumbled against rocks and scratched his arms on thorny bushes. The heavy rain made it almost impossible to see the path ahead. At last, exhausted, Quito sat beneath a large tree. His body shivered from the cold. His legs ached. His hands trembled. For the first time since leaving the village, doubt entered his heart. What if everyone was right? What if I should go home? The rain continued to pour around him. He closed his eyes. Suddenly, memories filled his mind. He remembered the children laughing at him. He remembered being called foolish. He remembered how every question he asked had been answered with fear instead of truth. He thought about Mama Zoe's quiet words. Fear is easier to remember than kindness. He thought about the map. House of healing. If he turned back now, the truth might stay buried forever. Slowly, Quito stood. His clothes were wet. His body was tired. But his courage had returned. I didn't come this far to let fear win, he said firmly. He tightened his grip on his walking stick and continued forward. The rain slowly began to fade. The clouds drifted apart. Sunlight broke through the trees once again. Then, just ahead, the forest suddenly opened. Quito stopped walking. His eyes widened. Standing beneath enormous ancient trees was the mysterious hut. It was exactly as it appeared on the old map. Its wooden walls were covered with moss. Long vines wrapped around the roof. The windows stood dark and silent. Time itself seemed to have forgotten the place. No smoke rose from its chimney. No voices came from inside. Only complete stillness surrounded it. For 100 years, no one from Nambla had dared to stand where Quito now stood. His heart beat louder than ever before. He had finally reached the place that generations had feared. Now, only one question remained. What was waiting behind that ancient wooden door? Quito stood motionless before the ancient hut. The rain had stopped, but tiny drops of water still fell from the leaves above. The forest was strangely quiet, as if every living thing was waiting to see what would happen next. His heart pounded so hard that he could hear it. This was the place everyone feared. This was the hut no one had entered for 100 years. Slowly, Quito climbed the worn stone steps. The old wooden door stood before him, covered with thick moss and tangled vines. Its iron handle was dark with age. He reached out his trembling hand. For a moment, he hesitated. He remembered the stories. The glowing-eyed monsters. The angry spirits. The terrible curse. What if they're right? He whispered. Then he thought of the old map hidden in the library. Asterisk House of Healing. Asterisk. He remembered Mama Zura's gentle voice. Asterisk Fear is easier to remember than kindness. Asterisk. Taking a deep breath, Quito wrapped his fingers around the cold iron handle. The door refused to move. He pushed harder. With a long, deep creak that echoed through the silent forest, the old wooden door slowly swung open. Quito stepped back, expecting something terrible to rush out. Nothing happened. No monsters. No angry spirits. No frightening voices. Only silence. After a few careful moments, Quito stepped inside. Dust floated through the soft sunlight that entered from the broken windows. The air smelled of old wood, dried herbs, and time itself. The hut was far different from what he had imagined. Instead of a dark cave filled with evil, it felt calm, peaceful, almost welcoming. The room was surprisingly well preserved. Strong wooden shelves still stood against the walls. Clay pots remained neatly arranged in their places. Bundles of dried plants hung from the ceiling, their shape still recognizable after so many years. It looked as though someone had carefully prepared everything before quietly walking away. Quito slowly explored the room. Everywhere he looked, he found signs that the hut had once been filled with purpose. Old scrolls rested inside woven baskets. Small wooden carvings of birds, trees, and rivers decorated the shelves. Stone bowls held dried leaves and crushed roots. Several glass bottles still contained faded powders of different colors. None of it looked dangerous. Instead, it looked like the workplace of someone who cared deeply about helping others. As Quito brushed dust from one of the tables, he uncovered several beautiful paintings rolled inside a wooden tube. Carefully, he unrolled the first one. His eyes widened. The painting showed villagers lying weak on woven mats while a kind-looking man gently cared for them. He mixed herbs, offered water, and comforted frightened families. Children smiled beside him. Parents thanked him. The healer's face was calm and full of compassion. Quito opened another painting. This one showed the same healer standing beside healthy villagers after they had recovered. People embraced one another with tears of joy. The village looked happy. There was no fear, no curse, only hope. Painting after painting told the same story. The mysterious hut had once been a place where lives were saved, not destroyed. Quito's heart grew heavier with every discovery. "Who are you?" he whispered as he looked at the healer's gentle face. His answer came sooner than he expected. On a nearby shelf lay several leather-bound journals. The covers were cracked with age, but they had been carefully tied together with woven cord. Quito untied the first journal and gently opened it. The handwriting had faded, yet much of it could still be read. The first pages described a terrible sickness that had spread through Nambla many years ago. Families became weak. Children developed high fevers. Many believed the village would disappear forever. But one man refused to give up. The healer spent every day searching the forest for healing plants. He worked without rest. He treated every family, whether they were rich or poor. Slowly, people began recovering. Quito smiled. So the healer really saved them. He continued reading. Then the story changed. As more villagers recovered, some leaders became afraid. The journal explained that the healer had earned great respect from the people. Villagers trusted him more than anyone else. Instead of celebrating his kindness, several powerful leaders grew jealous. They feared losing their influence. One night, they gathered secretly. Rather than thanking the healer, they accused him of using dark magic. They claimed no ordinary person could heal so many people. Rumors spread quickly. The very people whose lives had been saved began to question him. Fear replaced gratitude. Trust turned into suspicion. Quito could hardly believe what he was reading. Another journal revealed the healer's own thoughts. Asterisk, I could defend myself. Asterisk, one page read. Asterisk, but if the people already fear me, my words will only divide them further. I will leave this village peacefully. One day, I pray that truth returns after fear has faded. Asterisk. Tears filled Keto's eyes. The healer had not run away because he was guilty. He had chosen loneliness to protect the people he loved. He sacrificed his own name so the village would not fall into violence. Keto quietly closed the journal. My whole village believed the wrong story, he whispered. They forgot their greatest hero. As he carefully placed the journals back on the shelf, his foot struck something beneath the wooden floor. A hollow sound echoed through the room. He stopped. Curious, Keto knelt and brushed away years of dust. Hidden beneath an old woven mat was a small wooden trapdoor. His heartbeat quickened. He slowly lifted it open. A narrow staircase disappeared into darkness below. Holding a small oil lamp he had found inside the hut, Keto carefully climbed down. The underground room took his breath away. Rows of clay jars lined the walls. Wooden shelves held neatly labeled bundles of dried herbs. Strong baskets were filled with carefully preserved seeds. There were healing roots, rare plants, medicinal flowers, and handwritten instructions explaining how each one could help cure sickness. Some scrolls described treatments for fever. Others explained how to clean wounds or prepare safe drinking water. Keto realized he was standing inside a forgotten treasure. Not a treasure of gold. A treasure of knowledge. Everything the healer had learned had been carefully protected beneath the hut, waiting for someone to find it. His eyes slowly filled with tears again. So much wisdom. So many lives could have been saved. The village had spent 100 years fearing this place. Yet inside these walls were the very things that could have made generations healthier, stronger, and wiser. There had never been a curse inside the hut. The real curse had lived inside people's hearts. Fear, rumors, jealousy, ignorance. Those had stolen the truth far more completely than any evil spirit ever could. Keto carefully gathered several journals, a few important scrolls, and a small pouch of healing seeds. He knew he could not carry everything, but he could carry enough to prove the truth. As he climbed back into the sunlight, he looked once more at the peaceful hut standing beneath the ancient trees. The building had guarded its secret for a century. Now that secret rested in the hands of one brave child. Keto took a slow, determined breath. The hardest part of his journey was no longer discovering the truth. It would be convincing an entire village that everything they had believed for generations was a lie. The journey back to Nambla felt much longer than the journey into the forest. Keto walked carefully, protecting the old journals and the small pouch of seeds inside his bag. Every few steps, he looked behind him, almost expecting someone to stop him. The healer's words echoed in his mind. Asterisk, one day, I pray that truth returns after fear has faded. Asterisk. Keto hoped that day had finally come. As the village came into view, relief filled his heart. Children were playing near the river. Women were preparing the evening meal. Smoke rose gently from cooking fires. For a brief moment, everything seemed peaceful. Keto hurried home to show his grandmother what he had found. The moment she saw him, tears filled her eyes. She rushed forward and wrapped him in a tight embrace. I thought I had lost you, she whispered. I'm sorry, Keto said softly, but I found something that everyone needs to see. He carefully placed the old journals, the map, and the healer's paintings on the floor of their small home. His grandmother looked at each one in silence. Her hands trembled as she studied the faded paintings. This, she whispered, this cannot be. It is true, Keto replied. The hut was never cursed. It belonged to a healer who saved our village. His grandmother looked at him with both hope and fear. If this is true, she said quietly, everything we have believed is wrong. The next morning, Keto asked the village elders for permission to speak before everyone. Curious villagers gathered beneath the great baobab tree. The chief sat beside the elders, his face serious. Keto stood before the crowd holding the ancient journals. His voice shook at first, but his courage slowly grew. I entered the ancient hut. A loud gasp spread through the crowd. Some people covered their mouths. Others stepped backward in fear. Keto continued. There were no monsters. There were no evil spirits. The hut belonged to a healer who once saved this village. He held up one of the old paintings. This is proof. The villagers stared at the faded image. Instead of listening, frightened whispers quickly spread through the crowd. He has been cursed. The spirits have tricked him. The paintings are evil. One elder stood angrily. You entered a forbidden place, he shouted. You have awakened dangerous powers. Another elder pointed toward Quito. Take those cursed books away before they bring disaster upon us. Several frightened villagers backed away from him. Parents pulled their children close. The chief slowly stood. His face showed deep concern. Quito, he said firmly, you are a brave child. But courage without wisdom can bring great suffering. You should never have entered that hut. Quito looked around at the frightened faces. No one wanted to hear the truth. They only wanted the stories they already believed. He lowered his head, feeling more alone than ever before. That evening, people avoided walking near his home. Some whispered that evil spirits were now following him. Others warned their children never to speak with him again. Even friends who had once smiled at him crossed the road to avoid him. The loneliness returned. Only this time, it hurt even more. He had risked everything to help them. Yet they feared him instead. Days passed. Then something unexpected happened. A strange illness began spreading through the village. It started with only a few people. Children developed high fevers. Strong farmers became too weak to stand. Mothers struggled to care for their families as sickness spread from house to house. Soon, nearly every home had someone lying in bed. Fear returned stronger than ever. The village healers tried every remedy they knew. Special prayers were offered. Traditional herbs were prepared. Sacred ceremonies filled the village square. But nothing worked. Each morning, more people became sick. The chief's own grandson developed a burning fever. Even several elders who had accused Quito could barely leave their homes. Panic spread across Nambla. The curse has begun, people whispered. It is because the hut was disturbed. Quito listened quietly. Deep inside, he knew something was wrong. This sickness felt familiar. He hurried home and opened the healer's journals once again. His eyes searched every page. Then he found it. A detailed description of the very same illness. The healer had written about its fever, weakness, and painful cough. More importantly, he had also written the treatment. The instructions were simple. 3 common forest herbs. Clean boiled water. Rest. Fresh air. Nothing magical. Only careful knowledge. Without wasting another moment, Quito gathered the herbs listed in the journal. His grandmother helped him prepare the medicine exactly as the healer had described. Together they walked to the home of a young boy whose fever had become dangerously high. The boy's parents hesitated. They remembered the elder's warnings. But as they looked at their suffering son, hope became stronger than fear. They accepted the medicine. Hours later, the boy's fever began to fall. By the next morning, he was sitting outside his home, smiling weakly as he drank water. Word spread quickly. The child is recovering. Soon another family asked for Quito's help. Then another. Then another. Every treatment followed the healer's instructions exactly. More villagers slowly began improving. Children laughed again. Parents smiled through grateful tears. The medicine worked. Not because of magic. Because of wisdom that had been forgotten. The village could no longer ignore what they were seeing. The same child they had feared was now saving lives. The same journals they had called cursed were helping their families recover. Even the chief stood quietly outside one home, watching an elderly woman regain her strength after receiving Quito's herbal treatment. His expression slowly changed. Confusion replaced certainty. Hope replaced pride. That evening, the elders gathered beneath the great baobab tree once again. This time, no one spoke with confidence. Silence filled the meeting. Finally, Baba Jengo looked around at the others. For many years, he said quietly, we believed our ancestors left us the truth. He looked toward Quito, who stood nearby holding the worn journal. But perhaps... He paused, his voice filled with sadness. Perhaps they only left us their fear. The other elders lowered their eyes. For the first time in generations, they began questioning the stories they had defended all their lives. And Quito realized that changing a person's heart was far harder than opening the door to an ancient hut. But at last, the truth had begun to find its way back home. The days that followed were unlike anything the people of Nambla had ever experienced. The sickness that had frightened the village slowly disappeared. Families who had feared losing their loved ones now smiled with relief as they watched them recover. Every person who regained their strength asked the same question. How did Quito know the cure? At first, few dared to answer. But soon, everyone knew. The answers had come from the ancient healers' journals. The same journals the elders had once called cursed. The village could no longer pretend they had seen nothing. One evening, Baba Jengo visited Quito's home carrying a small oil lamp. I would like to read the rest of the journals, the old storyteller said. If there is more truth hidden inside those pages, our village deserves to know it. Quito nodded. Together with his grandmother, they carefully spread the old books across a wooden table. Hour after hour, they read every page. Some pages described new medicines. Others explained how to grow healthy crops and protect clean water. But near the end of the final journal, they found something no one expected. Several folded letters had been hidden between the pages. Their seals had long ago turned brittle with age. Baba Jengo carefully opened the first letter. As he read, the color slowly disappeared from his face. What is it? Quito asked. The old man looked at him with sad eyes. This changes everything. The letter had been written by one of the village's earliest chiefs. It was not a confession meant for the public. It was a private message to his own son. In it, the chief admitted that the healer had never practiced witchcraft. He knew the healer was innocent. Yet he also feared something else. The healer had become the most respected person in the village. People trusted his wisdom. They listened to his advice. They admired his kindness. The chief feared that one day the people would stop following their leaders and begin following the healer instead. So he made a terrible choice. To protect his family's power, he allowed false stories to spread. He never stopped them. Instead, he encouraged them. The healer was called dangerous. The hut became a place of fear. Parents warned their children to stay away. Each passing generation added another frightening tale. The lies became traditions. The traditions became unquestioned truth. For 100 years, no one challenged them. Silence filled the room. Quito stared at the letter in disbelief. So the curse. He swallowed hard. It was never real. Baba Jengo slowly shook his head. No, the real curse was greed. And fear. The old storyteller closed his eyes for a moment. One man's selfish decision became the burden of many generations. The following morning, the chief was invited to Quito's home. He listened quietly as Baba Jengo handed him the letters. No one spoke while he read them. The chief's hands began to tremble. His face grew pale. When he reached the final page, he slowly lowered the letter onto the table. I recognize this seal, he whispered. It belonged to my great-great-grandfather. The room became silent once again. The truth had reached the very family that had carried the village's leadership for generations. The chief looked toward the window. His eyes were filled with pain. If these letters are true, he said softly, then my own family helped bury an innocent man. He lowered his head. My ancestors protected their honor, but destroyed someone else's. For the first time in his life, the chief questioned everything he had been taught. His heart was caught between two painful choices. If he accepted the truth, his family's name would forever carry shame. If he rejected it, the healer's sacrifice would remain forgotten. Neither choice was easy. By sunset, news of the letters had spread throughout Nambla. The peaceful village quickly became divided. Many people gathered beneath the great baobab tree, arguing with one another. Some villagers were furious. The hut should be burned, one man shouted. It has brought nothing but trouble. Others agreed. If we destroy it, perhaps all these painful memories will disappear. But many people disagreed. An elderly mother whose grandson had recovered stood before the crowd. No, she said firmly. That hut saved my family. It deserves respect, not fire. Several younger villagers nodded. The healer gave everything to protect our ancestors. He deserves justice. Soon the arguments grew louder. Friends turned against friends. Neighbors stopped listening to one another. Some blamed the old chiefs. Others blamed the elders. A few even blamed Quito for uncovering the truth. The village that had once been united now stood on the edge of another painful division. Keto watched the growing anger with a heavy heart. This was not what the healer had wanted. He remembered one final sentence from the journal. Asterisk, truth should heal people, not give them new reasons to hate. Asterisk. Those words gave him courage. He stepped into the middle of the crowd. Everyone slowly became quiet. Keto looked at the angry faces surrounding him. I know many of you are hurt, he began. I am hurt too. He held up the healer's journal. The man who wrote these pages lost everything. He lost his home. He lost his good name. He even lost the people he loved. Keto paused, allowing his words to sink in. But he never asked for revenge. He only hoped that one day we would remember the truth. The crowd listened in silence. If we answer one old mistake with new anger, Keto continued, then fear wins again. He looked toward the chief. We cannot change what happened 100 years ago. But we can choose what happens tomorrow. His words touched many hearts. People slowly lowered their voices. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Even those who had demanded the hut be destroyed began to look ashamed. The chief stepped forward. He looked at Keto with quiet respect. You are only a child, he said softly. Yet today, you have shown more wisdom than many leaders. The crowd remained silent. For the first time in generations, the people of Nambla were no longer fighting monsters or curses. They were facing something far more difficult, their own history. And only by accepting the truth could they finally begin to heal. 3 days later, the entire village of Nambla walked together toward the ancient forest. For the first time in more than 100 years, no one turned away from the narrow path leading to the old hut. The same trail that had once been avoided now echoed with quiet footsteps. Children walked beside their parents. The elders leaned on their walking sticks. Hunters who had once feared the forest carried no weapons. Even the chief walked with his head lowered, deep in thought. Keto led the way. As the people reached the clearing, the ancient hut stood peacefully beneath the enormous trees, just as it had for generations. Nothing about it had changed. Only the hearts of the people had. Many villagers stared silently at the old building. Some remembered the frightening stories they had heard as children. Others remembered warning their own sons and daughters never to come near this place. Now they realized they had feared a home built to save lives. A heavy sadness settled over the crowd. Keto stepped forward carrying the healer's journals, the old paintings, the faded map, and several carefully preserved herbs from the underground room. One by one, he placed them on a wooden table that had been prepared outside the hut. The villagers gathered close. There was no fear now, only curiosity. Keto gently opened the first journal. He did not rush. He carefully explained everything he had discovered. He showed them the healer's notes describing the terrible sickness that had once threatened the village. He showed them the simple herbal treatments that had saved countless lives. He unfolded the paintings, allowing everyone to see the healer caring for children, comforting frightened families, and celebrating the recovery of those who had once believed they would never see another sunrise. Many villagers could not hold back their tears. An elderly woman touched one of the paintings with trembling fingers. My grandmother told me stories about a kind man who helped everyone, she whispered. I thought they were only bedtime stories. Another villager looked down in shame. My father warned me never to speak his name. We forgot the best person our village ever had. The silence that followed was filled with sorrow. Not because of fear, because of regret. Baba Django slowly stepped beside Keto. Holding one of the old letters high for everyone to see, he read the painful truth aloud. Every word echoed through the forest. The people listened without interruption. They heard how jealousy had become lies, how lies had become tradition, how tradition had buried the memory of a good man. When the reading ended, no one spoke for several moments. Even the wind seemed to stand still among the trees. Then, one by one, the elders walked toward the front of the crowd. The oldest elder removed the necklace that symbolized his position. With tears in his eyes, he bowed his head before the ancient hut. For many years, he said quietly, we taught our children stories that were not true. We believed we were protecting them. Instead, we protected our fear. Another elder stepped forward. We judged a man we never knew. We honored false stories instead of real sacrifice. We ask forgiveness from those who came before us, and from those who will come after us. Their voices trembled with regret. Many villagers began crying openly. The chief slowly walked toward the center of the gathering. He looked at the old hut for a long time before speaking. "My family has led this village for generations." His voice was heavy with emotion. "Today I must admit that our family also carried the weight of an old lie." He turned toward the people. "My ancestors chose power over truth. Their decision caused generations of fear." He then faced the hut and bowed deeply. "To the healer whose name was stolen, I offer the apology that should have been spoken 100 years ago. I cannot change the past, but I promise before everyone gathered here that the truth will never again be hidden." His words touched every heart. Even Quito wiped tears from his eyes. For the first time, the healer's sacrifice had been honored. The curse of silence had finally been broken. In the weeks that followed, the village worked together every day. No one was forced to help. Everyone came willingly. The old hut was carefully cleaned. Broken walls were repaired. The roof was rebuilt using fresh wood and strong grass. Dusty shelves were restored instead of thrown away. The underground room was protected so future generations could learn from it. Near the entrance, the villagers placed a carved stone memorial. On it were simple words that everyone could understand. Asterisk asterisk, here lived the healer who chose kindness over anger, truth over fear, and hope over hatred. May we never forget again. Asterisk asterisk. Whenever people passed the memorial, they paused for a moment of respect. The hut no longer belonged to fear. It belonged to the entire village. Soon it became a place of healing once again. Young men and women learned how to prepare safe medicines using the healer's journals. Parents brought sick children there for care. Travelers from neighboring villages came seeking knowledge instead of running away in fear. The forgotten seeds from the underground room were planted in new gardens beside the hut. Rare healing plants began growing once more. The wisdom hidden beneath the forest slowly returned to the people. Quito spent many afternoons teaching children what he had learned. He showed them the old map. He explained the meaning of the symbols carved into the trees. Most importantly, he reminded them that asking questions was never something to be ashamed of. "Do not fear knowledge," he would often tell them. "Fear only the lies that keep you from finding it." The children listened carefully. Unlike the generations before them, they grew up believing that courage meant seeking the truth. As the seasons passed, something remarkable happened. The forest itself seemed different. Hunters walked its paths without trembling. Birds sang freely among the ancient trees. Families gathered near the hut without worry. The strange silence that had once covered the clearing disappeared. Nature had never been cursed. Only people's hearts had been. Now, at last, peace had returned. The ancient hut still stood beneath the towering trees, but it was no longer remembered as the place everyone feared. It had become the place that reminded an entire village that truth is stronger than fear, and kindness can heal wounds that have lasted for generations. Many years passed, and the village of Nambla changed in ways no one could have imagined. Once, people had spoken of the village with fear. Travelers avoided the forest, and parents warned their children about curses and angry spirits. But those days slowly became part of the past. Now, Nambla was known for something very different. Wisdom. The restored hut beneath the ancient trees became one of the most respected places in the region. Visitors traveled from distant villages and neighboring lands to learn the healer's forgotten knowledge. They came carrying questions instead of fear. Inside the hut, shelves once covered with dust now held carefully organized journals and medicines. Young healers studied the old writings. Farmers learned about the healing plants grown in the surrounding gardens. Mothers learned how to care for sick children using safe remedies that had once been hidden beneath the floorboards. The place that had been feared for a century became a place where lives were protected. Quito grew older, but he never forgot the lonely child who had once stood before a locked door while an entire village trembled behind him. People now called him Teacher Quito or Guardian of the Hut, but he never sought praise. Whenever children gathered around him, he told them the same lesson. "Fear is powerful," he would say, "but truth is stronger when we have the courage to look for it." He taught them to ask questions. He taught them to listen before judging. And he taught them that kindness should never be buried beneath rumors. One warm afternoon, as the sun painted golden light across the forest, Quito stood quietly near the memorial stone honoring the forgotten healer. A small girl approached the hut carrying a basket of flowers. She could not have been older than 8. Quito watched as she stopped before the doorway. For a moment, he remembered his own trembling hands and racing heart on the day he first arrived there. But the girl did not step back. She looked up at the restored roof, the peaceful gardens, and the carved stone memorial. Her eyes were filled not with fear, but with wonder. "Is this the hut that everyone used to fear?" she asked. Keto smiled gently. "Yes," he answered. The girl tilted her head. Why were they afraid? Keto looked at the ancient trees swaying softly in the breeze. "Because they stopped asking questions," he said. The girl nodded thoughtfully, then walked inside the hut with quiet excitement. Keto watched her disappear through the doorway, and a deep peace filled his heart. The forest was calm. The hut was alive with learning. And a new generation was growing up free from the chains of fear. Long ago, one brave child had dared to seek the truth when everyone else chose superstition. That courage had uncovered a forgotten healer, healed a divided village, and transformed fear into hope. In the end, the greatest lesson of Nambla was not about a mysterious hut or a hidden secret. It was about the power of a single courageous heart. Real courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to question fear, search for truth, and choose compassion over ignorance. And because one child chose that path, an entire village found its way back to the light.